Hello, ladies and gentlemen. From all of us here at KTV2, we wish you all a happy Eid, Eidkum Mubarak, and welcome to our live coverage of the rapidly evolving Middle East situation, where local and regional developments continue to reshape economic conditions, aviation operations, and diplomatic engagement. As efforts intensify to stabilize the aftermath of the conflict, attention remains firmly fixed on the Strait of Hormuz and its broader implications for trade flows and regional security. Governments and international partners are balancing cautious reopening strategies with the ongoing negotiations aimed at sustaining a fragile ceasefire while industries adjust to persistent uncertainty. The coming weeks will be critical in determining whether coordinated diplomatic and operational measures can support a gradual and lasting return to stability. That said, we'll begin with the latest in local updates, where the National Guard Undersecretary, Lieutenant General Hamid Al-Berjes, visited today the sites of responsibility secured by the National Guard's duty forces. In a press statement, the National Guard stated that the Lieutenant General Al-Berjes exchanged Eid al-Adha greetings with National Guard personnel and conveyed to them the greetings of the National Guard leadership. During the tour, the Lieutenant General emphasized the National Guard's leadership's pride in the efforts of its personnel in securing vital sites, stressing the importance of vigilance and adherence to duties and instructions to maintain the country's security and stability. Amid the latest local developments, Kuwait Airways has announced a major expansion of its global flight operations, operating approximately 728 weekly flights in June this year, covering 58 international destinations. More on that in this report.
Of its global flight operations, with Acting Chief Executive Officer of Kuwait Airways Abdul Wahab Al-Shatti stating that the carrier will operate approximately 728 weekly flights in June of 2026, covering 58 international destinations, following the receipt of necessary regulatory approvals for several new routes. This represents a significant increase compared to the current schedule of around 420 weekly flights across 45 destinations, reflecting a gradual recovery and expansion of operations after a period of severe regional aviation disruption. Al-Shatti explained that the expanded June network will include a wide range of destinations across Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, including Malaga, Alexandria, Salalah, Sarajevo, Nice, Vienna, Antalya, Bodrum, Trabzon, Mykonos, Zurich, Moscow, London, Manchester, Amsterdam, Madrid, Barcelona, Istanbul, Geneva, Milan, Rome, Paris, Frankfurt, and Munich, in addition to destinations in South Asia such as Delhi, Kathmandu, Bangkok, Manila, Guangzhou, Islamabad, Dhaka, Mumbai, Bangalore, Colombo, and several major Indian cities. Regional routes will also include Beirut, Cairo, Doha, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Riyadh, Jeddah, Medina, Dammam, Manama, and other key Gulf and Arab destinations, alongside African cities such as Casablanca. He noted that since February of 28, the airline has processed nearly 500,000 ticket cancellations, with approximately 55% of refunds already completed, while the remaining 45% are still being processed, citing operational disruptions, banking verification procedures, and high demand as key challenges affecting refund timelines. Despite these difficulties, he emphasized that the airline has maintained flexible customer policies, allowing passengers to retain tickets for up to 2 years and rebook without additional fees or fare differences. Al-Shatti also highlighted that global aviation conditions have significantly impacted operational costs, particularly due to a more than 120% increase in jet fuel prices and rising insurance premiums, both of which have contributed to higher ticket prices. He further explained that the extended flight times caused by airspace closures have increased fuel consumption and operating expenses, adding additional financial pressure on the airline, despite efforts to maintain competitive pricing. He added that some fare structures are influenced by shared commercial agreements between airlines, where ticket pricing is divided across multiple carriers on connecting routes, sometimes leading to higher perceived costs for passengers depending on segment allocations. The airline is also using advanced systems to optimize route efficiency and reduce operational costs while ensuring network coverage meets passenger demand. Addressing operational challenges during the crisis, Ashati explained that the airline faced complex logistical issues following the closure of Kuwaiti airspace on February 28, including aircraft and passengers being stranded abroad, as well as transit passengers within Kuwait. Emergency plans were activated, with stranded citizens repatriated through coordinated flights via Dammam, while transit passengers were accommodated in hotels or rerouted through alternative hubs. He further confirmed that more than 2,180 Kuwaiti citizens were repatriated through 15 flights between the 2nd of March to the 13th of March, while additional flights were arranged for medical patients, students, and stranded travelers across Europe and Asia. The airline also transported over 2.4 million kilograms of essential goods, including food supplies and critical medicines, ensuring continuity of national supply chains during the crisis. Ashati concluded by affirming that Kuwait Airways remains committed to restoring full operational stability while continuing to expand its global network in response to market demand and evolving geopolitical conditions.
We are now joined by Mr. Nader Rong, a political and economic analyst, also a member of the board of the Chinese Association for Middle Eastern Studies. Good afternoon, Mr. Rong. Thank you for joining us today, sir. Let's begin with our first question.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course, sir. Looking at the recent U.S. strikes on southern Iran, could you tell us how Beijing is evaluating the current state of the ceasefire?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, Eid Mubarak. And from the Chinese perspective, China urged all the relevant parties to honor the commitments to ceasefire and solve disputes and in a peaceful way, and continue to work for solutions that accommodate the legitimate concerns of all parties through dialogue and negotiation, so as to restore peace and stability to the Middle East and Gulf countries at an early time.
Mr. Nader, do you believe, from your perspective there in Beijing, does China see these actions, this recent strike, as a total breakdown of the negotiations, or is this sort of tactical maneuvering before a final agreement to sort of put pressure on Tehran to accept more favorable terms for Washington?
I don't think it's a complete breakdown of negotiation. The two parties are still in a negotiation, and it's China calls on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and avoid back to the war. And also China is doing China and other countries are always doing its mediation efforts to avoid the escalation of the situation.
Now, Mr. Rong, since the beginning of the conflict, Beijing has consistently urged and championed dialogue over military action. From the perspective in China, what is the most realistic path forward to bring Washington and Tehran back to the negotiating table while both of their demands are total opposites and in complete contradiction of the other's demands?
Yes, China always believed that the military means and use of force cannot solve the problem, but will cause or trigger to new problems. And all the disputes and differences between different countries should be resolved through negotiation and dialogue. And for this, for the negotiation between United States and Iran, we should have the patience, and also China advocates phased roadmap. First of all, the two sides should freeze high risk actions and reduce hostilities between the two parties, and then gradually discuss sanctions and nuclear restrictions. And also, should use the third parties as Pakistan and Oman and China as communication channels and to guarantee the ceasefire. And first of all, all the parties should hold on the ceasefire and not use military forces and all back to the war again.
Mr. Rong, could you tell us how the Chinese leadership views the U.S. insistence on a 60-day renewable ceasefire? It was initially a 30-day pause to allow for negotiations, with the possible extension up to 60 days. Is this temporary pause sustainable, or does Beijing believe a long-term resolution is impossible without immediate and comprehensive sanctions relief for Iran?
China always believe temporary ceasefire is insufficient to build mutual trust, but at least it can serve as a starting point. A long-term solution requires sustainable and requires the efforts from all the parties to rebuild the confidence, mutual trust between Iran and the United States, and the two parties should show its strong will to negotiate and to avoid any escalation of the current tension situation, and especially the United States should also offer Iran as I think as to lift the sanctions, and also to show its real will for negotiate and to abandon using the military forces to threat, especially during the negotiation period.
Mr. Rong, Iran has recently floated the idea of a protection fee or a transit toll on maritime passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Could you tell us how Beijing views this development?
Beijing opposes any unilateral protection fees while calling on the international community to acknowledge Iran's legitimate security concerns. China always believed that the Strait of Hormuz should be the international corridor for the commercial ships and should not be charged from any countries in the world, and it should be guaranteed for the safe and natural path for the commercial ships through this strait, and return its situation in the Hormuz Strait, return to the situation before the war embarked, and also to guarantee or promote multilateral negotiations on transit path rules. But in any ways or in any occasions, it should not all of the countries should not put or impose protection fees on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz.
Sir, while we're still on the issue of the Strait of Hormuz, seeing as China is a massive consumer of global energy, how vulnerable is China's energy security to the blockage on the strait? Or does China believe that it is its alternative energy sources allows it to be insulated and isolated, sort of immune to any of these energy shocks?
For now, the influence or the negative impact of the block of Strait of Hormuz is under control for China, and China has renewable energies and has a national a strategic reserve of oils, which reach 1.4 billion barrels of oil, and also China has diversified its oil supply from different sources from the world. But if the blockade continue for several months, also China will face a great pressure in its supply of energies. And China, beside that, China is also using its corn as coal as the alternative resource of oil. And so we can say that the negative impacts on China is limited and under control for now. But if the blockade remain for several months, that it is very China also will face a big pressure in the supply of oil.
Sir, we've seen very sharp rises in oil prices, coupled along with volatility in the oil markets. If negotiations were to stall completely and the conflict drags on, perhaps with a return to hostile kinetic aggression, what are the long-term economic implications, not just for China, but for the entire Southeast Asian and Asian region of the world?
Yes, we can see that the war in Iran triggers to energy crisis, and also we can see there is a worse increase of the fees of the cost for shipping and insurance fees, and also for the raw materials for the productive activities in the world, and it also will lead to inflations in different countries, even inside the United States. They also face the problem of inflation, and in Asia countries like Japan and South Korea and India, they also face energy crisis because more than 80% of their oil supply rely on the Strait of Hormuz, and if the blockade will continue for several months, the whole world economy also will face a recession. And this is very dangerous, especially for countries like China, which rely on the exports and the world consumption. It will also face a decline, a very sharp decline. So it's very dangerous. It's not for only one country or two countries, for the whole world economic, and all the countries will suffer from the continue of the blockade of the war in the Strait of Hormuz.
Now, Mr. Rong, could you tell us if Beijing believes a bilateral deal between the U.S. and Iran can hold, especially if there are regional proxy fronts, specifically in Lebanon and Palestine, and there's potential risk of aggression coming from Yemen, which we haven't seen yet, but that option and potential still remains. Does Beijing believe that a deal can be struck with these regional proxies sort of still active?
Beijing believes a simple bilateral agreement is unlikely to remain durable if the proxies conflicts still continue, and it must be accompanied by a regional security dialogue, a mechanism that includes Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and other issues. And China urges all the relative parties, including Israel, and should uphold the ceasefire agreement, and also to not to stop continue fighting in all the fronts. Otherwise, a proxy conflict will continually undermine any ceasefire.
Now, sir, we've seen throughout the negotiations there are many points of contention between Washington and Tehran. I believe of the various points in the negotiations, the regional proxies that we just discussed, the nuclear issue, and the issue of the Strait of Hormuz. Which of these three do you believe is the hardest point in the negotiations between the two sides?
I think the most complex issue is the nuclear issue because we can see the aims of the war towards Iran is to prevent Iran to have nuclear weapons, and also to the United States insist on that the enriched nuclear uranium should be moved out into outside Iran, and this is the point that Iran didn't agree with, and we can see the supreme leader of Iran emphasize that all the materials, especially enriched uranium, should be kept inside Iran. And we can also see that the core point of the agreement is to keep Iran to not developing any nuclear weapons and any nuclear activities that will enable Iran to have nuclear weapons. So I think this is the most complicated point. And also the proxies of Iran, I think, is also another conflict issue inside this negotiation, because it seems that Iran cannot give up its proxies in Yemen and in Lebanon and in other countries, but it is also a very dangerous or a security concern for the U.S. side and Israel. So the most important thing, or the top priority now, is to uphold the ceasefire and continue negotiation and find the solutions that accommodate all the legitimate concerns for all the parties, and find a solution that will a sustainable solution and a balanced solution to restore this peace and the stability in the Middle East.
Now, sir, in light of the recent strikes, U.S. strikes on southern Iran, is there serious concern in Beijing that the hostile aggression will return? As we've seen, there's in Iran, they've announced full military readiness, and there's reports that there's a lot of, let's say, refueling and resupplying aircraft from the U.S. Army within the region. Does Beijing show or exhibit signs of serious concern about a restart of hostilities?
Yes, Beijing follow the latest develop of the situation closely, and Beijing has always emphasized that all the parties should uphold the ceasefire, and we can see that from the past more than 2 months, that the military means cannot solve the problems, and it will trigger more hostilities and more new problems between the two sides. So China urged all the parties, and we can see that in the China-U.S. summit before 2 weeks, China also emphasized that the two sides should not use military means to solve the problems. And any conflict, the final way is negotiation. And also, the two sides should find a proper, the comprehensive solutions that accommodate all the concerns from all the parties through dialogue and negotiation. And China will continue its mediation efforts. And if the war is continue, and if it has been not been reached in the comprehensive agreement, China will never stop its in mediation efforts.
And sir, finally, looking at the broader picture politically in the region, how does Beijing balance its deep economic partnership with Iran while simultaneously maintaining and balancing its trade relation with the U.S. and its partners and allies here in the Gulf? It is a very complex and tricky situation for Beijing to be in. So could you share with us how it is sort of balancing these ties and relations with the various parties?
Yes, China is always pursued a principle of non-alliances for a long time. And China the role of China in the conflict is to restore peace and stability. China will not support any parties to fight against other parties in the region. And China is always standing at the right side of the history, and to diffuse the tensions in the region. And China always play a constructive and responsible role in mediating the crisis in Iran. And also, China is the biggest trade partner of all the countries in the Middle East, Gulf countries, and Iran. And Chinese stance is always impartial and neutral. And I think China will hold up its impartial stance and position, and to using mechanism such as local current settlement and trade to balance its the different to balance the interests of different parties in the region, and to realize the biggest reconciliations between Iran and Gulf countries, as what China does before 3 years ago, that China has succeeded in the reconciliation between Saudi and Iran, so that China will continue its efforts to be a big contributor to the economic development in Gulf countries and in Middle East countries, and also to remain as the mediator in the conflicts in the Middle East, to restore the peace and stability in the region in the early time.
Well, Mr. Rong, I'd just like to thank you once again for taking the time and joining us in our coverage as we cover the latest developments taking place here in the Middle East. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Na Durong, a political and economic analyst, as well as a member of the board of the Chinese Association of Middle East Studies. Moving on to other updates around the world, where many of Europe's largest banks have raised loan loss provisions for risks related to the tensions in the Middle East during the first quarter, citing uncertainty over the impact and the duration of the conflict. According to the S&P Global Market Intelligence analysis of the latest round of bank earnings, European lenders attributed more than 1.5 billion euros of fresh provisions to the military escalation and geopolitical risks. More on that in this report.
Many of Europe's largest banks increased their loan loss provisions during the first quarter in response to rising uncertainty linked to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, with lenders collectively setting aside more than 1.5 billion euros in additional buffers for geopolitical risk and potential macroeconomic deterioration, according to an analysis of recent earning data compiled by S&P Global Market Intelligence. Although the direct financial exposure of European banks to the conflict has so far remained limited, institutions across the UK and continental Europe have opted to strengthen reserves due to revised macroeconomic scenarios that account for possible second-round effects such as weaker GDP growth, elevated inflation, and tighter financial conditions across global markets. UK-based lenders accounted for a significant share of the provisions, with HSBC Holdings plc recording a $300 million expected credit loss charge described as precautionary and designed to reflect potential global spillovers rather than immediate regional losses, while management emphasized that no material deterioration in credit quality had yet been observed. Similarly, Standard Chartered plc set aside $190 million in additional overlays, noting that its cost of risk remained within long-term guidance at 32 basis points, even as executives acknowledge that stress testing scenarios now incorporate the possibility of prolonged geopolitical disruption. In parallel, NatWest Group plc reported €140 million provision driven primarily by revised macroeconomic assumptions rather than credit impairment, while management indicated that customer activity and loan performance remained broadly stable despite heightened uncertainty, with revenue expectations for 2026 potentially reaching the upper end of the €17.2 billion to €17.6 billion guidance range due to sustained higher interest rates. At Barclays plc, Middle East-related provisions of €101 million were partially offset by tariff-related adjustments, although the bank also faced additional charges linked to private credit exposures, contributing to a broader increase in overall cost and risk cost during the quarter. Other European lenders also adopted a cautious stance, with Spain's Banco Bilbao Vizcaya Argentaria SA setting aside €98 million for potential indirect impacts, particularly through slower economic activity in Turkey and parts of Europe, while acknowledging the effects in Latin America remain neutral and mildly positive. Meanwhile, Belgium's KBC Group NV and Netherlands AB and AMRO Bank NV both maintain net interest income and guidance despite adding €75 million and €67 million in provisions, respectively, reflecting continued uncertainty over the duration of the conflict and its impact on inflation and interest rate trajectories. However, not all institutions have adjusted expectations downward, as ING Group and NV raised its net interest income forecast for 2026 to as much as €16.7 billion, citing resilience in credit quality and stronger than expected income generation supported by higher for longer interest rates and deposit repricing effects. Overall, the European banks, while they continue to report stable underlying performance, the accumulation of over €1.5 billion in precautionary provisions underscores a sector-wide recognition that prolonged geopolitical instability could significantly reshape economic conditions, even if immediate impacts remain limited.
As we continue to cover the geopolitical and economic implications of the rapidly evolving situation here in the Middle East, we'll now be joined via Zoom with our KTV correspondent in London, Jamal Shaheen. Good afternoon, Mr. Jamal. Thank you for joining us again, sir.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Sir, over the past few days, we've seen Downing Street and the UK Foreign Office intensifying their consultation with allies regarding security and contingency planning in regards to the Strait of Hormuz. From London's perspective, how serious are the concerns that the conflict could directly impact Britain's economic and national security stance?
This is a very important issue. The direct national and economic security concern for the United Kingdom over recent days. The Downing Street and the Foreign Office have intensified consultation with allies amid of fears that any prolonged disruption in the Gulf could rapidly affect the global energy market, which we saw today, and a huge impact. The energy bill becomes more higher with nearly 13% from July, which the government would not try to find it for many time. This is very important issue. This is why we see when the Iranian and the American announced 2 days ago, it might be have a draft for a final agreement. The United Kingdom and also the Prime Minister said they are welcome all of this effort and they are ready and prepared to play its rules for the security and the stability of the Strait of Hormuz and be ready for deployed the international mission to secure the stability of the Strait of Hormuz. Otherwise, there is a huge negative impact will be in the coming days for the economy in United Kingdom and Europe.
Sir, we've seen British officials reportedly reviewing additional military coordination measures with NATO and its Gulf partners. What is the latest regarding possible military involvement from the UK or any expanded naval operations regarding the Strait of Hormuz?
Regarding any military invention, it should be a peaceful one, it should be a defensive one, but this should be after they agreed about the final agreement and there is a stop of the hostile activity from both sides. Will be the mission we talk about many times, which in 3 stages. They sent some assist to the area to clear the navigation, to clear the Strait of Hormuz from mines, and then they will try to establish a policing force to escort the shipping and guarantee the security and stability of the free navigation at the Strait of Hormuz. But before all of this, there will be also the United Kingdom announced it will send a high technology drone, a high technology defense system to be deployed in the area to secure or to be activated against any high-speed boats or any drone from the Iranian side or any hostile activity to guarantee the stability and also the free navigation at the Strait of Hormuz. This is one of the most important issues. This is a very sensitive maritime corridor, which is nearly 20% of the global energy is coming from this way, from the Strait of Hormuz. So they are trying to do what it can by diplomatic and also by defensive mission, which nearly 12 countries agreed to send more troops, especially France and Germany and the United Kingdom, to secure the stability and clean the corridor from any mines by Iranian government.
Now, Mr. Shaheen, could you tell us if England is exhibiting any of the economic repercussions, or have the wave of repercussions not yet reached the English Isles?
The discussion is already made in 17 of April in France by 51 countries, and then there are another 3 military meetings for the leader already happened, and the defense secretary announced they will fund independent and comprehensive multinational force. It will be independent, and they funded with nearly $120 million to establish this force. But this it should be after the agreement between Iran and the United States.
Sir, in recent days, we've seen that British Airways and several other European carriers have continued adjusting their Middle East routes in light of the escalations and the shutting down of some airspaces of these countries. How significant is the crisis now affecting London's aviation sector and broader European travel networks?
It's a huge, my dear colleagues. One of the most important issue here, the British people and European people is very keen about the summer holiday. When the summer holiday, nearly 12 flights were already canceled because of the shortage of the fuel, and the tickets becomes very higher. One of the most important issue, what they will do if this crisis continue, they will join like four flight together. If you are from London Heathrow, from Luton, from other, if there is a place in one of this flight, they will bring the whole passenger from other airport to be in one flight to save the fuel, because the crisis becomes a high. The airlines has a warning that the cost of the fuel, if this is the matter, will continue. There has no option to cancel nearly 20% of the summer flight in July. This is a huge negative impact in the travel and the transport sector, which even in the market, the stock change and the stock for this sector becomes very low and under a huge pressure.
Sir, in light of the crisis here in the Middle East, we've seen oil price volatility, a sharp rise in shipping insurance costs, as well as huge pressures of inflation. From the UK, what are the economic experts and policymakers currently concerned about most if instability were to continue here in the Middle East?
The continuance of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. This is one of the most important issue at this time. As I told you today, the price of the pill will be higher, nearly 12%. The former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, issued a warning that the Labour government, shared by Keir Starmer, don't have a plan to deal with many issues, especially the oil and the gas. If the Strait of Hormuz is still closed, this means we will see by June or July a new Prime Minister, because the failure of this government, the high cost of living and the high cost of bill, it will be higher. And as I said before, one of the most important issue here is the fuel and the gas and the electricity. If this crisis is continue, the price will be double after 3 months in winter, which means the cost of living here in the UK becomes higher, which is we have a huge and many broken promise by the British Prime Minister, and the British government, the Labour government, will face a big challenges in this time. If you remember, we were talking many times before about the failure of this government in the local election will lead to instability and uncertainty for the British government, which now we have impact in the economy, which already happened.
Now, sir, as you mentioned, in light of the recent election results and the potential of a new Prime Minister in the UK, could this possibly change London's stance and approach to the conflict?
No. We have some different analysis here. We have the civil servant, which is a policymaker in the Foreign Office and in the other country, and then the decision maker. The policymaker, which is the civil servant, decided what is right and what is not right. But because the Gulf state and the GCC country is a deep-rooted strategic relationship and ally for the United Kingdom, and also United Kingdom have just announced a free trade agreement with the GCC country. Any new government will need to change its position towards the Middle East. It might be involved more to the crisis in Middle East. But if Andy Burnham is coming, he's more left. That means he will be more on the side of peace and the side of de-escalation, and also will be more the side to work with European country and GCC country to de-escalate the situation, even if this is the situation of the Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Now, Mr. Shaheen, could you tell us if there's more room for pressure from the UK and the European side, if they can put more political pressure on the US to end these negotiations, to come to a final agreement? Because it seems that it's strictly Washington that is constantly changing the goalpost, the objectives of the negotiations, the objectives of the war. So is there room for more pressure from Europe on Washington?
It's highly unlikely, as the British said, because they don't have this room and pressure and the influence during the Ukrainian crisis. So it will be the same pressure and the same influence like what's happened in Ukraine. It should be the same, because the distance between point of view between EU and the United Kingdom and President Donald Trump becomes bigger and bigger. Even the state visit by His Highness, the King Charles III, doing a little bit narrow the gap between them, but it's still the same point. It's still the same, and the attitude between both sides, especially in the transatlantic treaty and the defense strategy, it becomes not like before. There is a huge demand here in Europe and in the United Kingdom to adapt a new strategy for defense and security, to be away from United States in the long term. But in short term, I don't think they have. The room is very narrow. The influence is very narrow. It's highly unlikely.
Now, Mr. Shaheen, earlier you were telling us about how European officials have had continuous and extensive discussions regarding security missions, sanction coordination, and protecting energy supply routes. Could you elaborate more on the main outcomes emerging from the latest EU consultations?
This consultation is, as I said before, everything should be after they agreed a final agreement and stop the whole hostile activity. And then the European countries are already, 12 European countries already announced they can send more troops, more ships to the area, because they don't want anything to be happen again. They don't need any unilateral or bilateral solution. They want what we have before the war. They want the same corridor, the international corridor between Iran and Oman, which is recognized by the international community and by International Maritime Organization. This is what the European country is pushing to have it now, to still to work with the old and with the normal corridor to allow free and security for the navigation of the Strait of Hormuz.
And before we let you go, Mr. Shaheen, we can expect more EU discussions and consultations on this matter. From London's perspective, what are the key expectations heading into any future discussions between the EU, the US, and allied partners here within the Gulf?
The expectation is changed from time to time, because there is a huge feeling here that during Elon Musk was being in power with President Donald Trump, with his policy, the efficiency policy, he fired a lot of experienced people, a lot of experts, because who knows the rules, who knows the basic rules for the foreign policy in the State Department. Now, to have someone who can understand the situation in Middle East and the relationship with Europe, the number is not like before. So the European feel this administration, it will take time to back to the normal track, to have the same coordination between them and the same coordination between any normal U.S. administration. Even Donald Trump, in his first term, he started to have a coordination with them, and by the end, he started to speak about the NATO and the EU, and he don't want the EU to be as a bloc. He want to deal with France. He wanted to deal with United Kingdom. He wanted to deal with every country as a separate country. He don't like to deal with the bloc. This is the feeling by EU that the U.S. administration is not the normal one to deal with it.
Mr. Shaheen, before we let you go, one final question. How do you see the future of British as well as European relations with the Gulf and the U.S. in light of this crisis here? Has it strained the relation, or has it given more fortitude and strength to these diplomatic relations?
The relation between British and the Gulf will be more and more from better to the best and from strong to strength. This is very deep-rooted relationship. Let's just to let you know, the United Kingdom was in a hurry to finalize the trade agreement with GCC country. They want to deal with GCC countries. They want to build a new strategic ally around the globe. And also EU wanted to have more strategic and more stronger ally and more to attract more investment, because the new era or the future era, the European country will try to invest more money in arm and defense. The only countries who have ability and the capability to have indirect investment is GCC country and Eastern Asian country. So they are looking for more relationship, more strategic relationship with GCC country, same as Europe and the same as United States as well.
Mr. Jamal Shaheen, I'd just like to thank you again for taking the time and joining us in this coverage, shedding light on London's perspective and viewpoint of the developing crisis here in the Middle East.
You are welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Jamal Shaheen, our KTV correspondent from London, UK. Now, the escalating tensions in the Middle East have triggered a profound shift in traveler behavior, consumer sentiment, and international aviation. The ripples of the conflict are no longer confined to the borders of the Middle East. They are fundamentally reshaping travel patterns across Europe, Asia, and Africa and beyond. More on that in this report.
The ongoing conflict is significantly disrupting Middle East tourism, while also reshaping global traveler behavior as travelers increasingly avoid the region and shift towards closer, perceived safer destinations amid rising uncertainty. Before the escalation in February 2026, the Middle East had been the world's fastest growing tourism region, with the World Bank noting that it had already surpassed pre-pandemic tourism levels by 2023, driven largely by strong growth in Gulf destinations such as the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. However, this upward trajectory sharply reversed after the conflict began, when thousands of passengers were stranded in major hubs including Dubai, Abu Dhabi and Doha, following drone activity and widespread airspace disruption, triggering mass flight cancellations and a surge in negative travel sentiment. By March 2026, the World Travel and Tourism Council estimated that the conflict was costing the regional tourism sector approximately $600 million per day, primarily to grounded flights, closed air routes, and collapsing consumer confidence, while hotel occupancy rates in key destinations such as Dubai reportedly fell to between 15% and 20% of normal seasonal levels. These disruptions have not only affected inbound tourism, but also transit flows, which are critical to the Gulf's aviation ecosystem, as the region accounts for roughly 14% of global international transit traffic, making its stability essential for long-haul global connectivity. Industry analysis further suggests that prolonged instability could lead to major structural losses, with an Oxford Economics report warning that a conflict lasting more than 1 to 2 months could reduce global international arrivals by up to 38 million in 2026, representing a 27% year-on-year decline and an estimated $56 billion loss in tourism spending. At the same time, survey data indicated that consumer sentiment toward destinations such as the UAE, Turkey, and parts of the Middle East has deteriorated, with travelers increasingly rerouting towards Southern Europe, Spain, the Caribbean, and domestic or regional alternatives, including rail based travel and staycations. Beyond immediate economic losses, analysts emphasize that the most significant impact is behavioral rather than purely geographic, as travelers delay booking decisions, prioritize flexibility, and reassess safety perceptions before committing to long haul trips, especially through Gulf transit hubs that traditionally serve as a key global connecting point between Europe, Asia, and the Americas. As a result, the conflict is not only reducing visitor numbers but also undermining confidence in the region's role as a global aviation crossroads, potentially reshaping airline routing patterns if avoidance behaviors persist. Ultimately, experts warn that even after the conflict stabilizes, the recovery of the Middle East tourism will depend heavily on rebuilding international trust and restoring the perception of safety, not just reopening borders or resuming flights.
And joining us via phone call to shed light on the developments and updates coming from the U.S. is journalist and specialist in U.S. affairs, Mr. Abdurrahman Yusuf. Hello, Mr. Abdurrahman. Thank you for joining us again, sir.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let's begin with our first question. Is the rhetoric we're seeing coming from the Trump administration purely a pressure tactic to force concessions from Iran, or is the administration trying to prepare Congress and the American populace for prolonged conflict?
Yeah, actually, we can say it's both. It's like this calm before a storm style, or like language is like a classical style for Mr. Donald Trump. He always liked to use coercive diplomacy when he negotiates something with any foreign policy matters. It signals that like rejection USA terms, it might like bring worse consequences, or like it will bring like an extra strike. And as we saw, like when like a couple days ago, when the sitcom announced that uh, like uh, like strike, self-defense strikes in southern Iran, and it wanted to show that they not only relying on the like rhetoric alone, or like a strong discourse alone, but they wanted to show that the administration is keeping the escalation credible and an option on the table, and as well it's like giving a room for diplomacy, because they said as well this will not violate the ceasefire terms, and considered it only just like a self-defense strike. But it gives a signals that USA is ready, and they have credible like power to use it. And in meantime as well, we know that Donald Trump wanted always to like prepare the ground for domestics like domestics matters, or like domestics affairs, that they are willing to go for more escalation if Iran like didn't show any flexibility with the USA terms. And like so far, like if they are both are on the table, so far we don't see any like high tense escalation from the USA, which give us hope that USA, if Iran showed flexibility, they are willing to sign this understanding memorandum, and we might see extra 60 days ceasefire.
Now, sir, how is the current escalation playing out domestically in the U.S.? We understand that from the populace, this is a very unpopular war, with over 60% of the U.S. population against strikes on Iran and continuing a prolonged war. What kind of pressure is Trump facing from Congress, from both the hawkish elements within the government, as well as the more cautious side of the government? One side is pushing and urging for him to restart the war with Iran. while the other side is trying to restrain his wartime powers and push President Trump to find a final agreement with Iran.
Yes, like, you know, in the Capitol Hill, Trump is facing
Hello, Mr. Abdulrahman. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it seems that we're having some technical difficulties reaching out with our guest, Mr. Abdulrahman Yusuf. We will take a short break and we'll resume this coverage right after that.
في ظل الأوضاع الراهنة معكم اليوم وزارة التجارة والصناعة المعنية في ملف الأمن الغذائي. اليوم نطمنكم بأن الوضع التمويني مستقر تماما ولا يوجد أي نقص في المواد الغذائية الأساسية. كذلك حركة الأسواق طبيعية والسلع متوفرة في نقاط البيع والمخازن بشكل منتظم. إنتاج المياه في المصانع المحلية مستمر على مدار الساعة لضمان تلبية احتياجات الجميع. سلاسل الإمداد تعمل بشكل طبيعي وسلس ولا توجد أي عوائق في تدفق السلع إلى الأسواق، كما أن الأسواق المركزية وجميع نقاط البيع تعمل بشكل طبيعي، والجمعيات التعاونية تواصل نشاطها المعتاد دون أي تأثير. ونؤكد على الجاهزية الكاملة لخطط الطوارئ مع استمرار فرق الرقابة التجارية في متابعة الأسواق ميدانيا بشكل يومي لضمان استقرار الأسعار وتوفر السلع الأساسية فيها. لذلك اليوم احنا نطمنكم ونبشركم بأن الأمور طيبة إن شاء الله ويحافظ الله.
تؤكد جمعية الهلال الأحمر الكويتي جاهزيتها للاستجابة للطوارئ والكوارث في ظل الأوضاع الجيوسياسية الحاصلة في المنطقة. جمعية الهلال الأحمر الكويتي تعمل من ضمن منظومة إنسانية متكاملة مع مؤسسات دولة الكويت من حيث الاستجابة السريعة وتجهيز المتطوعين من ضمن أفرقة مختلفة للاستجابة للطوارئ في سرعة قصوى. يعد متطوعين جمعية الهلال الأحمر الكويتي من المتطوعين اللي تم تدريبهم مكثفاً في الإسعافات الأولية والاستجابة للكوارث والاستجابة الميدانية. تؤكد جمعية الهلال الأحمر الكويتي جاهزيتها الميدانية ورفع جاهزيتها من حيث الاستجابة للطوارئ في حالات اللي يتم ندائها. بالنسبة للمخزون الاستراتيجي لجمعية الهلال الأحمر الكويتي فإحنا على أتم الاستعداد للاستجابة في حال النداء من قبل مؤسسات حكومة دولة الكويت.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue our interview with journalist and U.S. Affairs Specialist Mr. Abdulrahman Yusuf. Sir, before we lost our connection, I had asked you about the escalation how it's playing out domestically in the U.S. as the Trump administration is receiving pressure from hawkish elements as well as cautious elements within the U.S. government.
Yes, I wanted to approach this answer by like shed light on what's going on Capitol. You know, on Capitol Hill, Trump is facing a split political environment, and we saw the Senate has already advanced a measure to curb his Iran war powers, like when 4 senators joined the Democrats and with 3 absent, and that like made it happen for like after seven attempts, like Democrats failed to pass this like this law to just start the negotiation or discussion about it. And we saw in the House Republicans that they had like to pull a planned vote before the Memorial Day because they lacked the votes to block the resolution that limiting the Mr. Donald Trump's military actions. So that means obviously that he is under pressure from hawks who like want to harder line on Iran, like Bet Hexes and partially Mark Rubio and some others on Fox News. But also as well, like not only for this, but also like from like growing block worry people who worried about unilateral escalation and a prolonged war. And like we know, like no one in the USA wanna like this trap as Iraq war or Afghanistan war. So the political risk is not just coming from the congressional matters, it also coming from some public figures. Some of them, they used to like support Donald Trump, like Tucker Carlson. and the others, and no one want to like this open-ended conflict, and like we saw the polling like in like Ipsos or with Reuters and New York Times polls, multiple polls showed and
Well, it seems we've once again lost connection with our guest from the U.S., Mr. Abdurrahman Yusuf, a journalist and U.S. specialist. Well, it seems we've reconnected with our guest, Mr. Abdurrahman. Hello, Mr. Yusuf. Can you hear us right now?
yeah, I hear you well. I hear you very well.
Would you like to continue your answer, or do you want us to move on to another question now?
If you heard me, I'm ready for the next question. If you want me like continue my answer about this like splitting in the USA over this war, and how now is the Republicans, some of them now are join Democrats for concerning about this open-ended war. And I was like mentioning that this all polling like that happened or occurred like last weeks. All of it showed that all Americans are worried about economy. Only 16% only they are like thinking that the economy is fine, which means is like now we have like 84% are concerning about the economy. And we saw this as well as like how the like Republicans like because of lack of votes in House of Republican, they pulled a plan to vote because like they are worried that they can't block this resolution that will limiting Mr. Donald Trump like military action. So yes, like Mr. Donald Trump is like encountering and like facing skepticism from Republicans it's themselves. So yes, this will affect his decision, and I think so far the like Hawks wing or far conservative wings, they are encounter backlash from Republicans and Democrats, not only Democrats only.
Now, sir, we saw in the build-up, the few weeks building up to the war, Trump was insisting that the objective of the war is a regime change and the end of nuclear enrichment in Iran. As the war began, and for 2 months, he would constantly change the objective or the goalpost. So, in light of that, does the Trump administration aim to force a systematic change within Iran, or is the objective now just limiting the ballistic missile and nuclear enrichment within Iran? At this stage of the conflict, what is the current goal?
Yeah, in this stage, like Donald Trump, of course, and the Republicans, they have like a strategic goals to like change the system and change the regime. They failed to change the regime, obviously, even if like they killed a lot of them. But like they want in the like today, for instance, Mr. Donald Trump like published about sexual abusing inside the Iranian prison, and that means like he started to reuse the discourse of human rights. We saw last few days that only the USA discourse or strategy of negotiation is focusing on Hormuz Strait and nuclear weapon program in Iran. But now, as we see this like post in Truth Social, maybe Donald Trump will need to realive this discourse about human rights. And as well, we didn't see any discourse or like talking about the plastic missiles. Therefore, I think strategically Donald Trump hasn't forgotten his goals. But now, because like what we mentioned about splitting in the USA, about what happens in Congress, the economy, he has a tactical goal is like to have a ceasefire for 60 days to solve the main problems that affect the economy. And now we have World Cup is coming, like celebration of 250 years of USA. So therefore, I think now Donald Trump is going to focus on limited goal, only nuclear weapon and the Strait of Hormuz. But after 60 days, Donald Trump, I think he's willing to continue put the pressure on Iran in way or another for even like if not a changing regime, so changing the behavior of Iran, specifically this hostile behavior against like its neighbors and the region, plus as well try to open up the society and find another like approach inside Iran to like I'm not saying bring democracy, like USA doesn't care a lot about democracy in Iran, but at least to find some other people who are less conservative than this regime.
So this brings us to our next and final question. Given that many countries such as Pakistan, Qatar, and other actors and countries within the region have done everything they can to salvage the mediation efforts, how much value does Washington generally place on back-channel diplomacy and these mediation efforts versus how much it's leaning on economic and military leverage or pressure against Tehran? And what do you think will be a more useful tool in this conflict?
Yeah, I think USA is actually aware that Gulf partners or allies are in a like splash zone or like war zone. Like the security concerns from Gulf states regarding to like Iranian drone and missiles and so on. I think it's like taking in consideration now. It seemed before it didn't or it hasn't been taken in consideration, but I think now USA realized that without Gulf allies, they can't achieve anything in the region. You know, like they at the beginning they ignored the Gulf states, but now they found that Gulf states are more reliable and they can really solve the problem. Even like Pakistan played a very good rules, of course, like to put both sides on the table. But without Gulf like mediation, like these last weeks that we saw how many Gulf states moved and they affected the negotiation positively. Now USA realizing that they can't move without Gulf states in the region, and not only Gulf states need USA, but USA needs Gulf states more than USA. Maybe they need them not just for security, energy. Security of energy or like anything else like related to security, but as well for like easing the tension in the area. And we saw even that Iran like is willing to listen to Gulf state to solve its problem. So the both sides who ignored the Gulf at the beginning, now they know that they can't solve their problem without Gulf. Therefore, I think like the USA now is preferring to involve Gulf states in this deal, and I believe that they will take them in consideration in matters of like final deal. And I think Gulf states as well, they have a very good opportunity or a chance to put their own conditions on the table. And they, I don't need to say force, but like make their word listened. So like in the future, Iran and USA like both know that Gulf states, they are the security key for the region and security key for the global energy and the security key also for the global trade.
Well, Mr. Abdurrahman Yusuf, that's all the time we have for our interview right now. I'd like to just thank you for taking the time to join us and shedding light on the U.S.'s perspective and position on the developing updates and developments here in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Abdurrahman Yusuf, a journalist and specialist in U.S. affairs. Now, as we continue to cover the latest news coming from the region, the Israeli occupation launched one of the heaviest bombardments amid the fragile ceasefire across southern and eastern Lebanon, targeting more than 100 sites. The strikes came after the Israeli occupation decided to intensify operations, saying troops were expanding ground activity and strengthening a, quote, security zone along the border. Meanwhile, Lebanon's health ministry said strikes in a village of Bekaa Valley have killed at least 11 people, including 2 children. Meanwhile, the Lebanese Ministry of Public Health announced in the latest report that the death toll from the Israeli occupation's aggression against Lebanon has risen to at least 3,213 dead since March the 2nd. In related news, the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, or the GCC, Jassim Al-Bdawi, affirmed that the GCC's support for Lebanon in all matters that would enhance its security, stability, and territorial integrity, and fulfilled the aspirations of its people for security and development. In a statement, the General Secretariat indicated that this came during two separate phone calls that Al-Bdawi received from the Lebanese Prime Minister, Dr. Nawaf Salam, and the Lebanese Foreign Minister, Youssef Raji, during which they discussed the latest developments in Lebanon. The statement added that Mr. Al-Bdawi stressed the importance of concerted international and regional efforts to support Lebanon in confronting current challenges and advancing the path of stability and development. He further noted that the two Lebanese officials praised the GCC's steadfast support for Lebanon's security and stability, reflecting the depth of fraternal ties and shared destiny between the two sides. That said, we come to the conclusion of our live coverage today, but the situation remains fluid, with developments across the Middle East continuing to influence regional stability, economic resilience, and international coordination efforts. While cautious progress is being made through diplomatic channels and gradual operational adjustments, the path towards lasting normality remains uncertain and dependent on sustained cooperation and de-escalation. The coming period will be decisive in shaping both immediate recovery and long-term stability across the region. We pray to Allah Almighty for the continued safety and security of our beloved Kuwait and the entire GCC region. We once again like to wish you all a happy Eid, Eid Mubarak. Thank you all for tuning in, and you can tune in for more news and developments in our next bulletin at 7 p.m. Till then, and as always, thank you for watching and have a good day.